And I'm also cognizant of the fact that you did not have to do this. And this is important. But you have chosen to do so. And therefore, it is important that you be recognized for doing so. But as a head of government, I want to take the opportunity to join in a public request to my fellow head of government of the United Kingdom to accept our kind invitation to commence dialogue in an open, transparent, frank, and dignified manner to talk of the need for reparative justice for the citizens of CARICOM. And to also use your good office as the convener to join with your European counterparts to address this issue with your French and Spanish counterparts in particular. And I make special mention of the Republic of Haiti. Because if there is one island where it is demonstrable that the need for reparative justice exists, is the Republic of Haiti. And so I wish to end by thanking Professor Beckles, thanking Dr. Dow, thanking Comrade Gill, and thanking all of you and the Trevelyan family for being here today. It's an emotional time. It can't be otherwise. But I'm happy that we were able to have this event. I look forward to many more of these events so that when Grenada celebrates its 100th year of independence from Britain, our citizens will point to Sir Beckles, Mr. Gill, Dr. Dow, the Trevelyan's, the Rastafarian community as the persons who led the successful fight for reparative justice. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. At this juncture, we would like to take a few questions, and we have to limit it to a few. There is a mic at the middle of the room. Mr. Oliver is standing by it. So we have one person up. Just 1 second. Before we continue, I would really like a young person, so I'm putting them in the spotlight, from one of the schools, SJC, PBC, Beacon, SAS, if we can get at least one young person to ask a question. We can only entertain about 3 or 4 questions. So, right, good, we have the PBC boy up and running. Wonderful. All right, so you can go ahead with your first question.
My first question is for Laura. Welcome. You've written a book called A Very British Family. You were speaking about your family. In the description, it said, "It is a rule that no Trevelyan ever sucks up either to the press or to the chiefs or to the right people. The world has given us money, enough to enable us to do what we think is right. We thank it for that and ask no more of it, but to be allowed to serve it." When you were doing that deep research about your family, did you ever come across that they had owned 6 plantations in Grenada and 1,000 slaves? As a journalist of 30 years, it is very difficult for me to believe that you did not question where this wealth was coming from. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and it's an excellent question. That book was published in 2006, and the University College London database went online in 2013, some 7 years after that book was published. And so no, I didn't know, which is why when the database was online, that's why we were also horrified to learn, and that's why we've come here today to apologize and begin what we hope is the start of a new relationship with Grenada.
Thank you, Laura. Our PBC, young man.
So my question would be to the head of the Reparations Commission, Mr. Gill. In relation to the Prime Minister's remarks on the fellow heads of government in the French and Spanish, well, in Spain and France, we would know that certain Caribbean islands would have flip-flopped throughout history between British, French, Spanish possession. So at what level of specificity should we hold European nations accountable? Because Grenada would have been under French colonization throughout history as well. So should we seek out reparations from the French government as well? Or is it just specific to the British government?
Thank you so much for your brilliant question. I whispered to Prime Minister Michel that as soon as this program is over, the international press will be calling him for interviews. Because here it is, you're having a Prime Minister of CARICOM publicly calling on his colleague heads of Britain, Spain, Portugal, France, and the former colonial powers. And let us not forget countries like Germany that did not formally colonized, for instance, in CARICOM, but who invested tremendously in slavery and profit, and Switzerland. So that this is a matter for heads of government. The CARICOM Reparations Commission is really an advisory body with regards to this trust for reparations. And we welcome Prime Minister Mitchell's statement this afternoon, and also to invite him to continue to press with his colleagues at CARICOM to continue to press on with regards to reparative justice. Specifically to answer your question, that is why I believe it is important to have the heads, because as you know the history, the French once colonized Grenada, and after it was the British. So too across most of the Caribbean islands would have changed hands at some stage. So it's for us to work out, and that's where the economists, the accountants, and so on have to come in. And in working with the governments of the region, basically, to work out a package. But when we think about reparations, we are not just thinking about a check being written. We want to emphasize that persons should refer themselves to the 10-point CARICOM plan, because what we are really looking at is a comprehensive social and economic development program for our region. Not just $100,000 or $100 million. We want investments in health. We want investments in education. We want debt cancellation. Because Prime Minister, as Minister of Finance, can say to you, what is the debt to GDP ratio that he's now faced with? How long would we, as a developing country, when will we be able to satisfy our debt requirements? Would we ever be able to satisfy our debt requirements? And as long as we continue to service these debts, these are resources that could otherwise be invested in health and education and infrastructure. And these are the fundamental issues. So when we speak in reparation, we're speaking holistically, and we're speaking about a broad economic and development, social development program for the region. So thank you very much for the question.
Student from St. Joseph Convent, just before you speak, we have online, we have a question online, so we would like to have it now, please.
So we have Dylan Bishop representing the Loop Caribbean News Network. I invite Mr. Deschamps to ask his question.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My question is a two-part question. And so the first part will be for Laura. Your family is donating £100,000, which is essentially about 3% of the value of your money. It would have received in today's money. So I want to find out from you, why not give back all of the money that you would have received at this essentially rid yourself of what is essentially not money? And my second question to the government, would you be seeking reparations from the descendants of colonized that are still living on Grenada and who are extremely wealthy and have been in sections of the country in their areas?
Sorry, could you repeat the second part of that question? I got the first part, but not the second. I apologize.
Let me change it. Sorry.
Well, I can answer the first part of the question, and then maybe you can repeat the second. And it's an excellent question. I'm sure that £100,000 seems grossly inadequate when you think that in 1834 our family received the equivalent of £3 million in today's money for the loss of what was termed our property here on Grenada. So I appreciate that it seems inadequate, that it seems like a token, that maybe it seems almost insulting. And I apologize for that, that it's not more. But I would say that it's what I, at this moment, am able to give. I hope this is the beginning of a relationship with Grenada. I hope that in collaboration with the Reparations Committee and the Government of Grenada and UWI, that we can be guided into how future money could be donated and spent. So I hope it's just a beginning. And I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the second part of the question, if you want to repeat it.
Okay, the second part of my question was actually directed to the government of Grenada, whereby I was asking if they were seeking reparations from the descendants of colonizing families that still live on the island, who are extremely wealthy and have influence in sections of the country's day-to-day affairs.
All right, I can answer by saying there are no such families, regrettably. And I suspect if there were such families, Grenada would be a fundamentally different society. But there are other examples of other islands with such families, Barbados being one such example. So I can't, at this point in time, obviously speak for the government of Barbados. Thank you.
Thank you. SJC.
Good afternoon. My question is for Ms. Laura. I would like to know, you said the database was released in 2013. Why did it take George Floyd's death for you to realize what your family had did? Why did it take so long?
I think what happened in the summer of 2020, when in America there was a racial reckoning about how one of the legacies and the impacts of slavery in America is police brutality towards black men. And I live in New York City, where there were protests throughout the city that summer. It was the summer of the pandemic. Our city was roiled by protests. And across American society, difficult questions were asked about the legacy of slavery and racism today. And as a journalist, as someone who asks other people difficult questions, I couldn't avoid the obvious question anymore, about which I had been wrestling with since John Dower emailed me and said, what about these records which show what our family was involved in Grenada? So I think, you know, it's human to procrastinate and to avoid the difficult, and I did until I couldn't anymore. And I would say that one of my favorite writers is Virginia Woolf, and she wrote that if you can't tell the truth about yourself, then you can't tell the truth about other people. And as a reporter, that struck home. Thank you.
Okay, we can only take 2 more questions because we're running out of time. So the young lady at the front, and then we'll take one of the students, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bernadette Charles. I'm a poet. I just returned home 3 years ago, so I'm going to start off my question with a poem. The world points to Hitler, the abuser of the Jews. Germans pay reparation. They compensate for his dues. But who abused Mother Africa? What are the names of the kings? Why aren't any fingers pointed at the queens? What are the names of the popes who stood by and blessed while Europe gang raped Mother Africa? Shouldn't they be paying their dues? When will they compensate? Well, will they repay our faith? When will they ask forgiveness? I think it's high time. This poem is called Reparation. I wrote it in a book called Slave Spirit Speaks back in 1992. Now my question is to our beloved Prime Minister. Sir, at your inauguration and the signing of the cabinet, I sat and I saw that we were still pledging allegiance to the Queen and all her descendants. This amounts to the Jews pledging allegiance to Hitler and all his descendants, as far as I'm concerned. When are we going to remedy this atrocity?
Thank you for the question. Well, I could answer by saying if I could wave a magic wand, I would have done so a long time ago, and we would be pledging allegiance to the people of Grenada only. But we also have to accept that changes is more than wishful desires or thinking. That we, as a people, not me, we as a people, would be required to have the conversation to accept that we do not wish to pledge allegiance to the king, to accept that we do not wish to be part of a monarchical system of government, and then to collectively agree on the steps to change that. Until we are prepared to do so, and I'm saying my part in this is to speak about it, to help lead the process for it to happen, to help have the discussions for it to happen. But as a country, it will take a majority decision via referendum for us to agree to do so. Mr. Gill made reference to the fact that we have, in the past, not even agreed to replace the Privy Council with our own Caribbean Court of Justice. And if this is democracy, and democracy says that the majority wish to have, for example, the Privy Council, then until we collectively get to the point where we say we don't want the Privy Council, then it's the Privy Council. So when we get collectively to the point where we do not wish to pledge allegiance to the British monarchy, we will do what is required to make sure that does not happen. I am happy, ready, willing, and able to pledge my allegiance to the people of the state of Grenada only. The question is, are we collectively ready to do so? And if we are, we have the majority of the government sitting here. The minority of the government is elsewhere. As citizens, if we put enough pressure on the majority and the minority, since we need a super majority to remove the monarch and to remove the Privy Council, if we as citizens put enough pressure, agitate, protest, call out, educate each other and say it is time for us to end our allegiance to the British monarchy, I am sure we will do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We have to take the last question from the student from SAS. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I have two questions, and they are directed to Ms. Lara. We would like to know how much money was amassed by the family during slavery, and how did they come up with the figures to give us?
Next question. That's the two questions.
Thank you very much for the question. The answer is that we don't know how much money was amassed during slavery. We just know the amount of compensation that was paid in 1834, which is the equivalent of about £3 million today. And the answer with regard, I would say there were other sources of family wealth, mining, for example, in Britain. Trevelyan's began as farmers in the west of England, and through a series of marriages, they inherited mining interests in England, and then also, as we learnt, interests here in Grenada. In terms of the figure of £100,000, there are family donations, separate ones, to, as we said in our letter, to Grenada, because family members believe very strongly in education and the right of rural children to be educated. Also to the bursary scheme at the University of the West Indies Open Campus in Grenada. And then my donation of £100,000 is to the University of the West Indies and here in Grenada, and that money will be determined, the spending of it, by the government of Grenada, the Reparations Commission and the University of the West Indies. In answer to the question, how did I come up with that figure? I came up with that figure because that's what I, at this moment in time, can afford to give. And I hope, I'm 54 years old, and when I turn 55 in August, that's the moment when I can give this money, because I will actually come into a pension from the BBC. And so I'm taking a proportion of that pension as a cash payment to give to the people of Grenada. But I hope that in years to come, and Sir Hilary is encouraging me to think of this, at least initially, as a 5-year process, a 5-year commitment, that I will hope to be in a position to give more money. And I hope that this works and that this achieves what all of us here want it to achieve. So I hope it's a first step. But I acknowledge that, given that I can't even tell you how much money our family amassed during the periods of slavery, which, by the way, is from about 1757 all the way through to abolition, so that's many years, so much money. The only hard figure we have is the compensation figure, and I realize that it seems wholly inadequate, and I'm sorry that it seems so inadequate.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, at this point, I would invite Mr. Angus Martin to make the closing remarks.
It will be brief. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to stand on precedents already established. Wande, Congo Te. The first enslaved Africans arrived in Grenada by at least the 1500s. Brought by the Kalinago and Kalina as captives, along with Europeans, they abducted from the Spanish and Portuguese in South America. It is not until the 1660s, however, that the French brought appreciable numbers of Africans as enslaved laborers, thus initiating chattel slavery in Grenada, as tens of thousands of tortured, captive souls would beach upon this alien shore in overcrowded, stinking prison ships across the horrific Middle Passage to banishment, enslavement, and cultural loss. By the 1690s, captive Africans and their children accounted for over 50% and dominated the population thereafter. At least 129,000 captives from across West and West Central Africa were transported to Grenada in the period of the transatlantic slave trade and African indenture. and their impact in Grenada was immense, despite misrepresentations to the contrary. Notwithstanding the determined efforts and continuous prohibitions by the colonial state and established churches to destroy all forms of African cultural practices, beliefs, memories, the enslaved and their descendants made their presence felt in Grenada. Because they were condemned as hewers of wood and drawers of water, it was widely propagated that they made no contributions to the Grenadian landscape. This landscape they inhabited and bore the pain of their enslavement. This landscape they toiled for much of their lives and sustained them invariably for generations. Captive Africans and their enslaved descendants transformed and altered the Grenada islandscape in diverse and multiple ways in the course of their heroic struggles to survive the death trap that was slavery and to make their lives bearable. Their legacy is probably no more visible than in the overwhelming numbers of their descendants who constitute the majority of Grenada's thriving population today, with their African memory traces embedded in the Creole landscape. And for the 2 centuries that they were held as enslaved and indentured laborers, Africans' impact on the Grenada landscape shine through today in its Creole culture. Beautifully embedded in its cuisine, folk traditions, dance, rhythms, language, celebrations, spiritual beliefs, proverbs, forms of association, agriculture, and of course, overwhelmingly, genealogies. The story of captive Africans and their descendants in Grenada remains at the core of the narrative of who we were and who we are, as their descendants are the dominant heirs to the Grenada islandscape, having triumphantly risen from decimated indigenous roots, forcibly grafted onto dominant European colonial foundations, yet sustained by their suppressed African memories to reassemble Grenadian society from shattered histories. They are the poets of oral languages, birthed from many tongues to voice their harrowing stories of survival as resistance. They are the makers and cultivators of provision gardens that fed a nation of malnourished bodies and starved appetites. They are the artists of the cultural landscape where music, dance, tales, folk spirits, and lore congregated in the moonlight to brighten, lift, and mend brutalized bodies and tortured spirits. They are the exploited builders of roads, harbors, buildings, and fortifications that earn no reparations for their sweat, blood, and toil, hence the current demands for reparative justice by their descendants. They are the exploited laborers who manufactured incalculable wealth that created personal fortunes for many, still seen today in the British and French countryside, and built foreign cities like London, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Providence, and Bordeaux, but left them and their descendants in this paradisical islandscape that today caters to tourists from these same cities, seeking their place in the sea, sand, and sun. They are the maligned Obeah priests whose bush medicines, remedies, and incantations quench thirsting souls and ailing bodies. They are the rebellious few who roam the forested interior defiantly while marooned on inaccessible mountaintops. Theirs are the fragmented genealogies meticulously profiled for their DNA fingerprints that can connect to reimagined or long-lost identities. But above all, they are the ones who survive through their sheer resilience and adaptability to inherit, to fashion, to contest, and to celebrate the Grenadian Creole landscape that abounds today, and which they continually refashion in evolving their changing identities as they learn more of their journeys, of the journeys of those who came before and since. In tribute and celebration to the 1,206 enslaved on the sugar plantations of Bouchejou and Tempe in St. George, La Sagesse and Rocaine in St. David, Crochou and Loa Simon in St. Andrew, I would like to share this old Grenadian saying, Wande, Congo Te. It was often voiced by someone who felt oppressed or taken advantage of, as a warning that their day will eventually come. They will have justice no matter how long it takes. It probably derives from one day will be Congo's day, with reference to an African from the land of Congo getting his due eventually. I would like to add a thank you to the staff of the Grenada National Museum who helped me fashion the exhibition at the back. I don't want to call specific names because I might leave out someone. It really, when we heard about Laura wanting to do this, we felt that the center of this activity should be the enslaved on the plantations, because this is what this is all about, and the idea of having everybody say their names. Because I think we need to do more about teaching Grenadian history in our schools. Grenadians need to know about all of this. And the Grenada Museum would like to invite everybody at some point when we reopen. We are currently closed, but we would use the beginning of this as a slavery and reparations exhibition as part of our reopening, hopefully by mid-April. Thank you very much, and I would like to thank everyone for coming here today and really allowing us to begin this conversation. This is a conversation, it is the beginning, and I really appreciate the Trevilians that give us this opportunity to start this conversation, because I think we sometimes are a little bit behind in the way that we start these conversations. We are sometimes afraid to start these conversations because for various reasons, and I think now we cannot stop. We now know where all of this begins, and we need to take it to the end. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you. Thank you.